I'm back with another video. Hope you're well. Happy New Year to you, wherever you may be watching. Don't forget, if you're new to the channel, if you could click that little subscribe button for me, I'd be grateful as always. My pledge to you, through 2024, I will spend as much of my spare time as I possibly can watching, previewing and talking about the gladiatorial sport of boxing that we all know and love. Now in today's video, guys, something slightly different for me. I'm going to be looking back at the Anthony Joshua performance against Otto Wallin, the AJ 2.0. AJ is back, as we've heard being talked about. To be looking at some of what I perceive to be the adjustments that Anthony Joshua has made since those back-to-back defeats that he had against Alexander Usyk last year. So let's get into this one. So let's start with the weight issue. Now, as we all know, Anthony Joshua is someone who has come out publicly and always said that the weight is not something that he really considers or takes into account. When he goes into the ring, he will just sort of weigh what he weighs based upon his training. But what we can't deny, and what we've seen, is that for these three comeback fights this year, Anthony Joshua's gone back to that 250-pound weight limit, the weight that he was, of course, when he fought Vladimir Klitschko, successfully stopping him way back in 2016, 2017. So it's just more muscle-bound AJ, heavier AJ than when we saw him go into the Ruiz 2 rematch at a career lightest 237 pounds, and then of course going into the Alexander Usyk boxing fight back to back. So what that says to me there is that when he fought those Ruiz 2 and then Alexander Usyk, he was either less strength based in his training, or he was preparing for a longer fight to have to box and move. So why would he have done that? And that's something that I sort of ask. Was it a matter of ego? Was some of the comments that he was hearing, the likes of Tyson Fury calling him a bodybuilder, flat track bully, one trick pony, was he trying to demonstrate that he was more than that he wasn't just about stopping his opponents, he also had the ability to box and move? Or, in my opinion, I think he was affected by the Andy Ruiz 1 fight. I think if you go back to that fight and go back to the third round, what you'll see there is that in that third round, after Anthony Joshua put Andy Ruiz down, Andy Ruiz then came back. AJ rushed him and got into range, unloaded the clip on Andy Ruiz. He caught Andy Ruiz in that fight with one of the cleanest right hands there that I've ever seen anyone take, and then Andy Ruiz was able just to eat it. That's why I always say Andy Ruiz has got one of the best chins in the division. He then was able to capitalise once Anthony Joshua had run out of gas. Obviously, as we know, he caught Anthony Joshua around the back of the head, scrambling it, or rather on the temple, scrambled his senses, and we then went on to win that fight. From that point onwards, following that fight with Andy Ruiz, for me, I think Anthony Joshua decided that he needed to, he couldn't just rely on having trade-offs in range. He needed to learn to use more of his boxing skills and to win fights in a different way. And as we saw, he was successful then in doing that when he went over to Saudi to beat Andy Ruiz over 12 rounds. In the rematch. The problem was then that the next fight he then went into, as we all know, was probably the worst type of opponent he could have come up against with that style in mind. Someone who was obviously undisputed in the cruiserweight division, has now gone on to be undisputed in the heavyweight division, and probably regarded as one of the best boxers and movers in recent times. I think a real legacy fighter in Alexander Usyk. And we heard Anthony Joshua went into that fight unsure of what his game plan was. It was an AJ that, in my opinion, was caught between styles, and it demonstrated in his performance where he was trying to box a boxer. He was standoffish. He was unsure or looked unsure and unconfident about throwing the right hand, and was unable to get himself in range. He played into Alexander Usyk's hands. If you go back and watch Usyk 1, I thought AJ was tight. He had a very high guard. He looked like he was overthinking his work. But most significantly, it was the speed of foot that Alexander Usyk was able to demonstrate and beating Anthony Joshua with the jab. Joshua unable to get his feet in range, to get his lead foot outside the Alexander Usyk lead foot, very rarely in that fight, because of the way that Usyk was able to use his movement and ability to get out of range. And I thought Anthony Joshua ended up looking very telegraphed in that fight. Not that I think, and this is perhaps an unpopular opinion, I don't actually think that when you consider that Anthony Joshua has never been known prior to that for his boxing. Not saying he couldn't box, obviously he was successful in the Olympics at boxing, but what I mean is we'd known AJ come through as this destructive AJ, stopping his opponents. So when you consider that, I don't think it was a bad performance against Alexander Usyk, but I just don't think it was the fight to fight, and it wasn't the fight we were expecting from Anthony Joshua. He then went into the second rematch, and he had more success. He certainly won more rounds in the second fight. I think there was a period around the 8th or the 9th round where he actually backed Alexander Usyk up towards the end of the round, targeted the body, got in range, had some success, and I think the bell then came at a good time for Usyk, who then very deliberately came out the following round and increased the tempo. He was determined not to allow Anthony Joshua to settle in any kind of rhythm into that back end of the fight, and he then went on to win some of those latter rounds. Alexander Usyk again winning the fight, as we know, I think on a majority decision or a split on a unanimous decision. So what we then had was Anthony Joshua going into that comeback fight with Jermaine Franklin, a fight that I watched live, as I did with the Alexander Usyk fight, and it was very clear to me with that fight against Jermaine Franklin that this was an Anthony Joshua who was caught between stars. Now, I don't underestimate the pressure that he was under in that Jermaine Franklin fight. When you consider he's just coming off the back of 2 losses, probably a loss there against Franklin could spell the end of his career. And let's face it, heavyweight boxing, it only takes one punch on the chin and it can be the end of the fight. So I think there was understandably a tighter, more anxious performance from Anthony Joshua, but it's very clear to me that he was overthinking his work. He hardly threw the right hand at all in those early rounds, jabbing and then back to his tight, high guard, looking underconfident and unsure about whether he could land that right hand. And we're now talking about, if we go back to 2 Usyk fights and the Ruiz fight before that, 2 Ruiz fights before that, 4 fights since AJ had actually stopped anyone. So understandably, that was the performance we got, which is, in my opinion, very much a byproduct of those early performances. He then goes in, as we know, versus Robert Helenius. Now, some people will say that Robert Helenius was there for the taking. He ought to have fought White. Helenius takes the fight at short notice. Regardless of whichever way you want to look at it, middle to late rounds, Anthony Joshua lands that right hand, sends Robert Helenius to the canvas, gives it the old X-Pac, which in my opinion was him sort of not just having a pop at his critics, but it was a release for himself to say that he finally found it. He back to what we all know and remembered of AJ, what that destructive knockout power that he carried, and of course the confidence that he would then given him, that he's then taken on to this performance against Otto Wallin. I thought here with Otto Wallin, his footwork was far superior. We saw his lead foot landing with the jab right outside the Otto Wallin lead foot, time and time again, right back behind the lead foot, very consciously, so that he was then able from there to drive the right hand right through the target, and he caused Otto Wallin problems with that all night long. Some other sort of subtleties and tactics that I thought from AJ in terms of his game into that fight. Of course, he looked far more fluid in that fight than he has done. You could see that there seemed to be a pressure release. Now, I appreciate Otto Wallin isn't an Alexander Usyk. He's not as skillful and doesn't have the speed of foot as Usyk, but he still had to beat what was in front of him. I liked the way that he was using a variety of punches. We saw him when he'd landed the 1-2, he was practicing range in the firing line on a few occasions. We saw AJ throwing the lead left hook to throw Otto Wallin off balance when he was in range. I thought that was effective. His head movement was as good, as effective as it's been for a long time. And I noticed that his guard was a lot lower in that fight. If you look and go back through Franklin and Usyk, it was a very high, very tight guard from Anthony Joshua. Whereas in that Otto Wallin fight, at times his guard was a lot lower down near his waist. A bit like we saw, like David Haye used to fight with a very low guard. And I just felt that relaxed him and made him look a lot less telegraphed than he has done. In the Usyk one, I thought he looked very telegraphed at times. Whereas in this fight, he was more fluid. Wallin without the ability to see where those punches are coming from the shoulders, and they were obviously coming from different angles, and different combinations that we haven't seen AJ from a long time. So, and let's not underestimate, as well as Anthony Joshua, now people are going to heap praise on Ben Davison, and I appreciate that since the split from Robert McCracken, Anthony Joshua has obviously gone off to America and been involved working with different coaches, so it's easy to heap praise on Ben Davison following that performance. But I certainly do think that he does seem to why I think that there's a gel there is because I think that Anthony Joshua is very much a pragmatist, someone who likes to know what the solution is to the problem so that he can execute the game plan. And I've heard some things in the past from the trainers in the corner that have sort of puzzled me. When we go back to McCracken when he fought Ruiz, you could see in Ruiz 1, Anthony Joshua was questioning whether he was doing was the right thing. Should he be taking the centre ring? Should he be letting Ruiz have the centre of the ring? Then you had the Usyk performance where you could hear the corner telling him how brilliant he was boxing. And I thought similarly with Derek James when he fought the previous fight against Franklin, and then the follow-up fight with Hellenius, some of the instructions from Derek James I thought were quite strange. Whereas I think with Ben Davison is someone who will just tell Anthony Joshua, very effective at telling what the problem is, and bringing out the best skills of himself to execute the game plan, which is what he needs to do. And that's what we saw against of course, Otto Wallin in that last performance. So that's my sort of summary, guys, on this Anthony Joshua version 2.0. Thanks for listening as always. Let me know your thoughts and comments in the comments box below. Do you think that we now will see an Anthony Joshua, a 3-time heavyweight world champion? In my opinion, I feel like we will. I think if we was to go back in with Usyk under Ben Davison, we would see a completely different performance. I don't think we will ever see again that sort of standoffish, far more aggressive going forward on the front foot. Remains to be seen, of course, but I think that this version of Anthony Joshua will be a 3-time heavyweight world champion. That's my opinion. Let me know yours. Don't forget to catch up with my next video, guys. I'll be looking ahead. I'll be looking back at my 5 boxers of the year. Spoilers alert, we've seen one of them in action over the Christmas period, who's sort of made history with his performance at the 122-pound super bantamweight mark. Won't give the name away, but I think you know what I'm talking about. So that one's to follow. Look out for that one. All that remains, so guys, if you can say thanks for watching, JH Boxing Fan.